Good evening. Good to have you with us on this edition of the Urban Debate here at 9 p.m. Viewers, as we fight a massive pandemic, several of the state governments have taken this opportunity to bring in what many call as labor reforms, labor law reforms. This essentially means that the acts and the rules and the laws that exist for the way our labor workforce should be hired, the way the contracts should be, the way they should be paid, their safety, their security, the permissions that companies need to start, the permissions that these industries need to shut down, to lay off laborers, all of those laws are currently being looked at. Now, we are being told that this is being done so that the huge migrant workforce that's currently going back home can be employed. We are being told that this is being done because a pandemic is also an opportunity, and we should take this opportunity to boost our business, to set up manufacturing, to attract investment, local and international, and become the massive manufacturing hubs such as China or even Bangladesh to a certain extent when it comes to textiles. Right now, 3 states have brought in significant changes in their labor laws. I want to take you through these changes. Uttar Pradesh has passed an ordinance that has brought in these changes. Effectively, almost 90% of the laws that were there regarding the labor force have been suspended in Uttar Pradesh. All laws except 4 in the state have been suspended. Establishment, factories and businesses exempted. Most labor laws have been suspended for a period of 3 years. Now, what have they kept back? Building and Other Construction Workers Act, Workmen Compensation Act, Bonded Labor System, which is a really old system of laws that we had, and Section 5 of Payment Wages Act. Next to Uttar Pradesh is Madhya Pradesh. Again, another state which will see a huge influx of people coming back home as the pandemic shuts down our big cities and big manufacturing hubs. In Madhya Pradesh, companies with up to 100 workers can hire as per need. No inspection is needed for firms with less than 50 workers. The working hours can be raised from 8 hours to 12 hours in factories. Overtime can be permitted up to 72 hours now, and there will be flexibility in changing shifts. Similarly, in Gujarat, laws have been changed, and the labor laws exempted now in Gujarat include minimum wages, industrial safety rules, and Employment Compensation Act 1923. That's not all. Odisha, Punjab, and Rajasthan are looking at minor tweaks. Also, the state of Karnataka is contemplating big changes, whether it's reduction of minimum wages, reducing of monetary benefits to the employees, increase in hours of overtime, wages per day, and reduce minimum wage gap. To help us understand what is it that we are looking at, I've got Mr. R Sriram, resident editor of Economic Times, joining us right now. Mr. Sriram, for a long time, there has been a big debate about the labor law reforms, bringing in these reforms to help industries set up. But what we are looking at, how do we define this and describe it to the common man?
Well, the way the reforms have been crafted and the way the laws have been changed and regulated, it is obvious that it is done with one single purpose. That is to get as much of investment as possible into these states, whether it is Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, or Gujarat. And some of the other states like Karnataka or Haryana or Tamil Nadu will also be probably planning to do something similar. I think you will understand this much better if you look at it as a kind of a competition between states to attract investment, both domestic and foreign. Given what has been happening in China, and given the world attitude towards investment in China and the need to look out for other sources of production, either in India or in Southeast Asia, to depend less on China, foreign companies and domestic companies are looking to change their production sites and bring production either closer home or bring production to other countries. Now, that is something that has been widely discussed, debated. A lot of people have commented on it. And we had a story, the Economic Times had a story about how Apple is going to shift a big chunk of its iPhone production to India, something that is worth almost $40 billion. So the changes that have been made by Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, probably not so Gujarat so much, but Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh need to be looked at as a first salvo that they have fired in this battle between states to get as much business as possible, get as much investment as possible into their states, and to ensure that the foreign and the other domestic companies come there. Now, we must also remember that Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh both have lagged behind in industrialization over the last 15, 20 years, especially after liberalization. The other states in peninsular India, southern India, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Haryana, NCR, they have run away with much of the investment, much of the jobs, much of the growth and prosperity. One of the reasons why we are seeing this migrant crisis is also because much of the labor from all these states have shifted to the coastal states or the western states or the southern states, and that's why you have this huge income disparity, huge income inequality, and huge business disparity between these states. So what the states are doing, especially UP and MP, and I suspect that this will be followed by other states like say Bihar or Jharkhand or even West Bengal for that matter, or even Odisha for that matter, is that they will now all compete to get as much investment as possible, and relaxing labor laws, ensuring that some of the real draconian old conditions that are no longer relevant, no longer needed, are done away with, is something that you will see more and more. And it's the first salvo that the states have fired in this war to get more investment. I think this battle is just going to picking up pace, and it's going to get more interesting as more and more states try and join this, try and jump into the fray to see what they can do to get more investment and more jobs.
All right, Mr. Sriram, thank you so much for joining us and really helping us understand, the way this is being projected and why the states are doing this. And like you said, and you're very right there, that we will see more and more states look at this option, especially at a time right now when we are seeing a reverse migration take place, and the states will have to figure out how to employ them. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, before we go across to our panelists for a larger debate, and the debate really is about reforms to boost business versus taking care of your workers, your laborers. Now, are we doing one at the cost of the other? Can there be a way where both actually take place? Earlier in the day, I spoke with the chief economic advisor, and he literally mentioned a trade-off. But he says that this is necessary so that you have more employment, you create more jobs, you attract more investment, and you ensure that more of your workforce comes in the formal sector. But here is the other point, and here is what we've been talking about, and I kept asking him, what about minimum wages? What about the working conditions? Where is going to be the government oversight in terms of what is being paid? Are the labor rights being abused? Are people being used as cheap labor for bare minimum costs, being made to work overtime, excessive hours without any safety precautions and security precautions within these working industries? Some of this has to happen, and some of this also has to happen, viewers. Do these changes in law really ensure that balance? Before that, here is the history that we need to know. Here is how labor laws largely existed in our country in terms of types of labor laws. The first one is about the condition of work. There's Factory Act 1948, the Contract Labor Act 1970, and the Shops and Commercial Establishment Act, which largely deals with the conditioning, with the situation and the environment where the work is taking place. Then there is the Wages and Remuneration Act, which is about the money essentially that you're paying your workers. Minimum Wages Act 1948 and Payment of Wages Act 1936. And then there is a larger issue of social security, something that we talk a lot about in this country but are nowhere close to what some of the Western countries really do. Employees Provident Fund Act 1952, Workmen's Compensation Act 1923, and Employees State Insurance Act. So, where are we and what do these changes really mean? Is the suspension really taking away the rights of laborers? Let's say good evening to our panelists who are joining us right now. Advocate Anil Dhumane, State Secretary for the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh of Maharashtra, joins us this evening. Mr. Gurcharan Das, author, economist and former CEO of Procter & Gamble, with us this evening. But first up, I want to go across to Mr. Yogendra Yadav, National President of Swaraj India. Mr. Yadav, sure, we need to create more jobs for the people, who have been hit by this pandemic. But do the suspension of labor laws cause a concern to you?
Tanvi, I've been listening to this debate. I've also heard arguments put forward by the CAA at some point, CEA. I think to posit this debate simply in terms of labor versus capital is not enough. I think the important thing right now is to say, okay, that there is an emergency. And in this emergency, what would help? I have been one of those who has repeatedly said, much to the annoyance of my friends, political friends, that we need labor law reforms. And in fact, I've said that too many laws, there needs to be simplification. We need to reduce some of the regulatory regime of the Inspector Raj. And at the same time, we need to ensure better compliance with whatever laws that exist. Now, this is a debate which has been carrying on in the past. The debate which has come in the last 3 or 4 days, Tanvi, has nothing to do with that. I'm astonished that people, reasonably intelligent people, come and give arguments in favor of labor reforms as if they would defend what has been happening in the last 3 or 4 days. What we have witnessed in the last 3 or 4 days in state after state is not labor reform of any kind. This is simply, as you rightly said, suspension of all labor laws. This is doing away with any labor laws altogether. I don't see how any of this is going to create greater employment in this country. As Mr. Sriram earlier said, this may have something to do with Bihar trying to, UP trying to snatch a few jobs from Bihar, Madhya Pradesh trying to get a few jobs at the cost of Maharashtra, which doesn't help the country at all in any particular way. To my mind, what we are witnessing is an assault. This is a coup where the basic point seems to be this. Look, we've been waiting to do something to the labor, but we were unable to do because there is democracy, because there would be noise. This is a wonderful opportunity. No one can speak, so don't do reform, just demolish. This is what is happening, and how can any sane mind defend this? And it's not merely about morality. It is not merely about labor interest. This is about having a healthy capitalism. Mind you, countries which have grown enormously, South Korea and others, have had labor unions. They have worked. So what we are doing here is something which would not contribute to the country's interest. This is in no way related to COVID-related contingency. Anyone who defends it, please give me one reason and show how are these so-called reforms related to corona emergency, and how would it help the country?
Okay, let me ask Mr. Gurcharan Das that question. Mr. Das, would you want to respond to what Yogendra Yadav is saying?
I think Yogendra has hit the nail on the head. The reality is this has nothing to do with COVID. The reality is that this is not, we should not see labor reform as a debate between capital and labor. Our archaic labor laws have needed to be reformed for the last 50 years, if not, since it should have been done in 1991. No single legislation has made India less competitive in the world market and has hurt the interests of labor itself. What these laws have done is create a labor aristocracy of 10% and has pushed the rest of the labor into an informal contract stage without any protection whatsoever. So ultimately, I think what has happened here is that it has harmed, and the reason why it's harmed our labor interests is because these labor laws protect jobs, not workers. And most of the world has realized this, and they protect workers, not jobs. So that's the real reform that we should move towards. And what happens basically in India, we don't recognize, the reason we protect jobs is that we are not aware that the market, there are downturns in the market. And you need to lay off workers when the business changes, the business model changes, the demand changes from the consumer. And, I'll give you an example. The most compassionate societies today are the Scandinavian societies. If you go to Denmark, in Denmark, you can hire a worker in the morning and fire the worker in the evening. But in 21, and the person has a labor welfare fund on which he depends, which is what we should also. And let me just finish. The reality is that in 21 days, if the worker does not report to the labor office for retraining or for a new job, he stops receiving those welfare incentives. So the point here I'm trying to make is that we need to follow the rest of the world. Our competitor countries are following this thing. Why Bangladesh, Vietnam, all these countries which are competing, Indonesia, which are competing against us, they have such flexibility. They have a welfare fund for unemployment, which is what we need. And therefore, what we need now is forget this whole COVID thing and what these states are doing. This is a national issue. But whatever, we seem to do reforms in a crisis. Well, this is a crisis. So let's do a reform in this crisis. Nothing wrong with that. But as Yogendra said, it has nothing to do with COVID.
So, Mr. Das, I get what you're saying.
1 minute here.
I get what you're saying. Effectively, you're also saying that while reforms have to be done, you cannot bring in such labor reforms without the safety net for the labor. The safety net is that fund, is that social welfare system that many of the Western countries, Denmark including, have. But we are looking at a situation where that doesn't exist, but we are headed the Bangladesh-Indonesia way, where there is a huge amount of criticism in the way those workers are handled and treated in the conditions that they are made to work under, with absolutely zero government scrutiny. Now, by suspending half of these laws, like Uttar Pradesh has done, more than that in fact, and Madhya Pradesh has done, are we not creating that kind of an atmosphere?
Well, I neglected to mention one important thing, and I'll answer your question in a second. Why is it that the labor, 90% of our labor has been pushed into the informal or the contract sphere without any protection? The reason is because you don't have an entrepreneur in India does not have flexibility to lay off a worker. He's very shy and very sensibly shy to hire a permanent worker. I faced this when I was in industry. We had a person used to come drunk and we could do nothing about it. He was on a very sensitive line in our company, but we could do nothing about it. So this has forced this situation. Nobody wants to hire a permanent worker. And this makes India's situation really unique. I just wanted to point this out with the relationship of what our labor laws have done to harm the interest of 90% of our labor. And so to answer your question, yes, I think we do need proper working conditions. But what I'm saying is that let us think, when this migrant crisis has shown us how vulnerable the Indian worker is, and we are worried only about that 10%. Let's worry about the 90% of our people. Let's bring them so if we make our laws sensible and flexible, people will hire them on a normal basis as they do anywhere else in the world.
Okay, yes, we have to formalize the sector, bring the 90% in. But again, I come back to this point, Mr. Yogendra Yadav, could there have been a better way to do it? To say that the laws just simply have been suspended for 3 years, does that mean that there will not be any kind of government intervention or scrutiny into the working conditions, the wages that are being paid, and how people are being hired or fired?
Tanvi, I was encouraged when I heard Mr. Gurcharan Das say that he agreed with some of the things I said. And I do expect it. After all, he's someone who thinks about ethics, morality. He writes about these things. He's not one of these crude, too clever by half young economists who don't know what they are speaking about and who can defend any vulgar thing in the world. I was disappointed, however, when I heard very generic and universal arguments from Mr. Gurcharan Das. Yes, sir, these are very good arguments for the need for labor reforms in general. I do think, however, that you might wish to show me some evidence where, and this is a question posed by a serious economist, show me regression model-based serious studies which demonstrate that labor law inflexibility has been one of the main reasons for India lagging behind in competition. Sir, that was true of West Bengal for some time. But in most Indian states, labor law compliance has been so low. And you cannot possibly say that Uttar Pradesh has lagged behind because of labor laws. Sir, labor laws don't exist in Uttar Pradesh. I was disappointed that you did not take note of it. I was also disappointed that while making these generic universal arguments for need for labor reforms, which is absolutely, in many of these things are very true, and I myself began by saying so, what you are defending, sir, is indefensible things which have happened in the last 5 days. Please tell me, Mr. Gurcharan Das, how does saying that a company need not provide toilet, need not provide drinking water, how does it improve, how does it damage labor aristocracy? How does it improve competitiveness? How does it improve India's economic environment? This is what you are defending, sir. And you are defending it at a time when this is being done away without any of those lovely things from Denmark that you were speaking about. I would have expected you to say, I support half of it, and I'm very disappointed that the other half has not come. I would have actually liked someone so concerned about morality as you, sir, to have said, unless you provide that kind of security and some social net, I will not allow you to go ahead with that labor reform. That would have been the ethical Mr. Gurcharan Das. I somehow see the Procter & Gamble chairman taking over your ethical philosopher, sir.
Do you want me to
Mr. Das?
respond? Do you want me to respond? Yes.
Yes, please. Yes.
No, Yogendra, I'll tell you, you're right. I took the generic position because I'm so, I frankly, what's happening in the last 4 or 5 days is not very relevant. What we need is an opportunity. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I cannot but agree with you. I agree with you completely that we can't do the sort of things they're doing. I just wanted to point out to you how our labor legislation has harmed the interests of our own labor, and what a historical mistake it has been, and it has held India back. I can tell you, investors get afraid when they see the labor laws in our country. And if I were a foreign investor, so would I. So if this is an opportunity to start the debate, to get things on a national basis corrected, I think it's a good thing. I think that I still maintain that these 150 laws that we have and 3,000 laws at the state levels that we have harmed not only India's interest and our interest for jobs for the country, but also have hurt the labor. And when I see a migrant worker, I see one of the causes of that being the labor legislation that we have in the country.
Okay, I take the point. In fact, in Uttar Pradesh and industrial hubs in Uttar Pradesh like Kanpur perhaps suffered because of that in the license Raj era, and the factories shut down, and that's why we see a huge amount of exodus from UP to other manufacturing hubs like Maharashtra or Karnataka. But again, Mr. Das, these changes have already happened. Gujarat has done it, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh have done it. Karnataka is looking at it. Odisha, Punjab and Rajasthan are kind of, tinkering with it, though Rajasthan already has a massive change that's taken place, and so they have a Rajasthan model already in place. Now, once the changes have happened, what's the point of the debate? Who's going to go back to the drawing board and make these improvements? Uttar Pradesh can say it's been done for 3 years, but the fact of the matter is you've suspended these laws, and that's how the system will now function.
I don't think it will function this way. I think there are sensible people who recognize what Uttar Pradesh has done is a foot in the door. It's not done it correctly. But we need desperately in our country, what you're looking at is that 10%. I look at the 90% of Indian labor. And I'm surprised that Yogendra, who is such a sensitive man, who's concerned about farmers, who's concerned about the unemployed, he doesn't resonate with the idea. I mean, if we could do what Denmark is doing, I would be very happy, because what we want is the flexibility that you have in the Scandinavian countries, but at the same time, we have a labor welfare fund, which is a safety net for labor. That's the way to go. And that's the real
So I think you and Mr. Yogendra Yadav, I think you and Mr. Yogendra Yadav are essentially agreeing that we need labor reforms, and I don't think anybody in this country disagrees on that front. He is very vociferously saying, not in the way it's being done right now. You are saying that it won't happen this way, that the second part has to follow up and has to come through. Nobody's going to implement it in such a way. I don't think me or Mr. Yogendra Yadav are that optimistic or have that much of faith in the way some of the governments are handling this. But before I go back to Mr. Yogendra Yadav, I believe we've also got Advocate Anil Dumane of the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh on the phone line with us. Unfortunately, we're having a bit of network issues with him, so we're unable to go live to him. But Mr. Dumane, Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh has said that this will be very, very detrimental, that this will lead to Jungle Raj, from License Raj to Jungle Raj. What is the biggest concern?
Yeah, this is a very correct reaction given by our central leadership. ये बहुत ही खतरनाक है, क्योंकि हम पिछले 100 साल से ट्रेड यूनियन ने जितनी भी संघर्ष करके जो अपने ट्रेड यूनियंस में जो अधिकार पाए हैं, उन सभी को आज एक ऑर्डिनेंस के द्वारा गवर्नमेंट ने विड्रॉ कर लिया है। ये बहुत ही कहेंगे कि ये इससे खराब चीज कोई नहीं हो सकती है। इसलिए भारतीय मजदूर संघ ने इसका पूरा विरोध किया है, और हम चाहते हैं कि ये जितने भी डिसीजन ये लिए हैं सब यूनिलैटरल लिए हैं। गवर्नमेंट ने लेबर ट्रेड यूनियन से कोई डिस्कशन नहीं किया है, किसी से चर्चा नहीं की है, और केवल एक ऑर्डिनेंस द्वारा इसको निकाल लेना, ये ट्रेड यूनियन के आंदोलन को खत्म करने का ही एक रास्ता गवर्नमेंट ने अपनाया है। कारण कोई भी हो, आज की जो वजह है जिसके कारण गवर्नमेंट ने इसको डिसीजन लिया है, ये यूनिलैटरल डिसीजन है। इस करने के पहले सभी ट्रेड यूनियन से डिस्कशन करना चाहिए। आज हम लोग, आपको मालूम है कि इंटरनेशनल लेबर लॉ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के अनेक कन्वेंशन जो है भारत सरकार ने उसको रेटिफाई किया है। इसमें ट्राइपार्टाइट डिस्कशन इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। जो भी लेबर लॉज के बारे में, जो भी इंडस्ट्रियल रिलेशन के बारे में अगर आपको कोई भी डिसीजन ले रहा है, इट इज मैंडेटरी, इट इज ऑब्लिगेटरी ऑन द गवर्नमेंट टू डिस्कस विद द ट्रेड यूनियन। आज कोई भी स्टेट गवर्नमेंट ने, किसी भी गवर्नमेंट, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट या स्टेट गवर्नमेंट ने ऐसा डिसीजन करने से पहले किसी भी ट्रेड यूनियन से डिस्कशन नहीं किया है, और ये बहुत ही अन्याय आज ट्रेड यूनियन के ऊपर और हमारे वर्कर के ऊपर हुआ है। हेलो
जी, सबसे बड़ा अभी आपके पास क्या आपको क्या डर है कि ये जो उत्तर प्रदेश में, मध्य प्रदेश, गुजरात में हो रहा है, कर्नाटका सोच रही है, बाकी भी राज्य सोचने लगेंगे, सबको इंडस्ट्री चाहिए, सबको इन्वेस्टमेंट और पैसा चाहिए, सब ऐसे लॉज लेके आएंगे। आपका सबसे बड़ा डर क्या है कि इससे मजदूर पे की जिंदगी पे क्या असर होगा?
इसमें बहुत ही बड़ा असर होने वाला है, क्योंकि अभी यूपी गवर्नमेंट ने जो डिसीजन लिया है उसमें मिनिमम वेज एक्ट भी एप्लीकेबल नहीं होगा, ट्रेड यूनियन एक्ट भी एप्लीकेबल नहीं होगा, इंडस्ट्रियल डिस्प्यूट एक्ट को भी सस्पेंड किया है उन्होंने। ईपीएफ है, प्रोविडेंट फंड है, ये जो सोशल सिक्योरिटी लॉ है, इंडस्ट्रियल लॉ है, स्टैंडिंग ऑर्डर है, मिनिमम वेजेस है, मतलब इंडस्ट्रीज में जितने भी आज लॉ है उसको पूरा अगर सस्पेंड कर देता है तो वर्कर्स का कोई राइट ही नहीं है। ट्रेड यूनियन अगर आप सस्पेंड करते हो तो इट इज अ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल राइट, जो हमारे फंडामेंटल राइट है उसको भी अगर आप विड्रॉ करेंगे तो ये कैसे चलने वाला है। आज ये इसके कारण केवल एक नहीं, आज जो स्थिति आज कोरोना की वजह से बनी है वो इतनी खराब नहीं है कि जिसके कारण आपको सभी के सभी लॉज को सस्पेंड करने की जरूरत है। आज हमने कहा गवर्नमेंट को कि ये करने की आज क्या आवश्यकता पड़ी है। जी हेलो
जी, दुमानी जी, हमसे बात करने के लिए धन्यवाद। जो आपने बोला वो पॉइंट मैं योगेंद्र यादव जी के पास भी ले जाना चाहूंगी। मिस्टर यादव, इट्स क्लियर टू एवरीबडी दैट कोरोना और कोविड राइट नाउ इज जस्ट एन एक्सक्यूज to bring in these far-reaching changes. Now, what's the way forward? How do we ensure that what the concerns are get addressed?
There is a simple way backwards, not forward. Remember, these labor laws have been discussed. In 2002, there was a national commission which was set up, which said exactly some of the sensible things, that there are too many laws, too complicated laws. Some of these need to be sorted out. They need to be more realistic. Governments did not do much about it. But in the last 2-3 years, 3 or 4 labor codes are being piloted. They are in the parliament. They are being discussed. And if the government is in such a hurry, the government can bring those codes by ordinance. I mean, that I wouldn't recommend it. But this is better than suspension. I would urge you, remind everyone, remind Mr. Gurcharan Das, we are not discussing labor reforms right now. We are discussing demolition. We are discussing suspension of all labor laws. I cannot imagine how anyone can support that. And Mr. Damane, who is a supporter of BJP, comes from RSS supported. Even when he has to say, you could say he is representing labor aristocracy. You could say he is representing labor unions, vested interest. But in this situation, that vested interest has greater insight on truth than what Mr. Gurcharan Das is saying. And the simple reason is this, Mr. Das. When someone says to me, should the DA of central employees be taken away, I actually have advocated yes. I have said yes, it should be done. If someone, I've in fact gone ahead and said no more 8th pay commission. We should not give, because that money can be used for these informal sectors. So yes, you are absolutely right. My interest are primarily is on those who are outside this 10%. But unless you can show me that by suspending these rights of the 10%, the remaining 90% gain, how can we even have a serious argument? This is like saying, and then there is point of a specific, today we are discussing something very specific. We are not debating in general merits or demerits of labor law reforms. We are discussing what has happened in a few in the last 5. What will be repeated, I am afraid this is going to become a national template. When we are discussing a rape in a city, at that time, someone cannot walk and say, oh, rape laws in this country are sometimes over strict. Of course, they are over strict. But is that the day when you want to talk about it? You might wish to reflect on it.
Absolutely, Mr. Das. I know you wanted to respond to that, but my apologies. I'm completely out of time. It's been a pleasure to have both of you on this conversation. I fear that we will have some more of these as more and more states rush into this kind of a decision, bring in such ordinances, suspend the existing laws without giving us a safety net. And minus the safety net, minus the assurity that the labor force will be taken care of, this looks like a big threat right now. But thank you both, gentlemen, for speaking to us here on the Urban Debate. Welcome back, viewers, and we continue with our conversation, the big debate on the labor laws changes or suspension of labor laws that's actually taking place, being touted by those who are doing it as labor law reforms. But the experts will tell you these aren't really reforms, because the good part that's supposed to come with some of the bad part that is supposed to go hasn't happened so far. We had 3 experts before this conversation who took us through the details of the changes that have been made and what could be the impact, what should have ideally been done. Now we are going to speak with political representatives and try and understand which way we are headed, because Here is where what the situation looks like. Rajasthan had already made some big changes. Now it's Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat that have effectively suspended a large part of the labor laws and the acts connected to it. Karnataka is mulling a similar format, but Maharashtra has brought in some changes, Odisha has brought in some changes, so has Rajasthan and so has Punjab, so has Goa. There are state after state after state that are looking at changes in the existing labor laws. Why is this a point of concern? Well, it is a point of concern because it deals with the population that lives on literally a daily wage, on bare minimum salary, on bare minimum wages. It deals with the population which is part of the poorest of our country and often don't get a voice. It deals with a possible situation that as these laws get suspended, the factories and the manufacturing industries will take advantage of that to make people work overtime, to pay them bare minimum, to not look at their safety and security without really having a strong enough social welfare system. So why are we doing this? What's the rush? Sure, getting the reforms, but why are we suddenly rushing towards it? Let's say good evening to Syed Zafar Islam, National Spokesperson for the BJP, Amarjit Kaur, National Secretary for CPI, and Adil Singh Boparai, National Spokesperson for the Congress Party. Amarjit Kaur, let's begin with you. Your party and many others have raised this as a big issue. What is the fear that you have?
You see, the agenda had been begun by Bharatiya Janata Party in 2014 itself, when they chose Rajasthan as the key state in leadership of Vasundhara Raje, who was Chief Minister. And certain laws were changed in the assembly, brought to the center, and then at that time, the president of the country, he was asked to sign it, and it was signed. After that, Prime Minister asked his PS to send advisory to all the state governments. And the advisory was sent to the chief secretaries of all the governments. And then they started initiating this thing. Presently, this government has chosen Uttar Pradesh as their key point. And that government has almost nullified 38 laws for 3 years and only 4 laws to remain. Those 4 laws doesn't matter much, but the other 38 laws which are nullified is a serious issue. So ordinance has been adopted, and that ordinance has been sent to President, to the central government to take accent and signature from the President of India. So it is not something new. This government, from the very beginning when they came into power, had contempt towards poor, had contempt towards worker. They were anti-workers. They were never in favor of the working class. They were always working in favor of corporates of India and corporates abroad. That is what is proven much more now, that they are taking cover of COVID-19, and using this cover, they want to crush the history of working class, having fought for 134 years to attain 8 hours working day, and then certain other several benefits. And the working class of this country won over their right to collective bargaining under Trade Union Act. Even that is suspended. So most of the laws which are suspended will turn our labor force into labor slaves. It is a direction towards creating bonded labor in the country. So that is my first reaction, immediate reaction.
Okay, let me get Mr. Zafar Islam to respond to that. Mr. Zafar Islam, we've also had experts raise this issue and say that you cannot really justify it at this point of time. Why are we rushing? Why are the states rushing to suspend labor laws?
Well, you have to understand that these are things which is important. All these kind of measures which people were asking, the investor community was asking, the overall industry's requirement. I think when people are talking about creation of employment, creation of job, especially I'm talking about the blue collar job, then all these reforms need to be undertaken. And it's not only restricted, as she said, that is only initiated by the BJP state-run state. It is also done by this Congress-run state. So it is. She has to understand that the way she was explaining is something like which is I totally disagree with her, purely because that's not the intent. The intent is only to remove what is the old archaic labor laws, and this needs to be improved, and something which is not important, not warranted in the current environment and context to attract investment is something which needs to be addressed. And I think that if India really wants to be a manufacturing hub, and if India wants to be really to take care of the number of blue collar job which needs to be in place, then you must create an environment both in terms of the labor laws, land laws, power laws. All these things need to be in place to ensure that the quality investment from global investor does take place, and we are able to create a lot of jobs for the people of India, which will benefit the labor, not only the labor but also improve overall condition of member of this labor community you are talking about.
Tanvi, I would like to reply.
Mrs. Zafar Islam, I'm looking at this. Just 1 minute, please. I'm looking at the changes that have been brought in Punjab and Rajasthan right now, and the changes largely have to deal with extending the work hours while ensuring that the workers get paid for that. This is not, in no way comparable to what's happened in Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh and even in Gujarat, where 80%, 90% of the laws have simply been suspended.
That's
suspended, Mr. Zafar Islam. That means there is not going to be any check and balances of what's being done, what you are paying. How much are you paying? If they're working or extra time, are they being duly paid for that? How they are being hired? How they are being fired? What are the safety norms in these industries and factories? Their own voice via a union. Now, we are suspending all of that because we want a few international dollars coming in. We could have very well planned a better investment strategy. We should have by now, but not at the cost of the people and their rights.
Why do you speculate that their interests will not be safeguarded? Just by having a union does not mean that the overall productivity will improve. Everyone knows that union only becomes a bottleneck in terms of improving the productivity of labor.
I am not talking about productivity at all. I am talking about labor rights and the rights of individuals.
I'm coming to that. As far as their interests and their welfare is concerned, I'm sure that the concerned state government will ensure that the safety net is available for them. All the safety net will be available to them, and the entire laws have not been suspended. There are certain things which has been made exception, particularly if you talk about Uttar Pradesh. Out of 33, three important section of that has been retained, and that safeguard the interests of labor. But by having a union does not does not only ensure that their interests will be protected, but in fact actually it reduces the productivity of those labors. And secondly, let me assure you one thing: this is the government who is extremely sensitive about the labor. By these people are only misusing the labor and never.
Mr. Zafar Islam.
This government is concerned about.
I'm sorry if I don't believe what you're saying right now, and I wouldn't. And I wouldn't believe any government that tells me that unless I see it on ground, Mr. Zafar Islam. Uttar Pradesh has suspended Minimum Wages Act. The Maternity Benefit Act, by the way, has been suspended. The act that protects employment of women during maternity has been suspended. Equal Remuneration Act has been suspended. Trade Unions Act, Industrial Employment Act that requires industries to define the employment conditions has been suspended. Industries Disputes Act has been suspended, that gives a way for redressal for the laborers has completely been suspended right now. Factories Act has been suspended for that seeks regulation of labor. And again, Minimum Wages Act, I will point this out one more time, that fixes minimum rates for wages for the workforce has been suspended. Essentially, we are telling our people that you have been locked up in various shelter homes during this pandemic for a month. 6 weeks without any jobs, without any source of livelihood, then we realized that you are going to become a source of law and order issue. So we said, okay, let's send you home. They are walking for thousands of kilometers, cycling for thousands of kilometers, dying on the way, and somehow reaching their place, and then we tell them, all right, let's employ you with absolutely no check on working conditions or the money that's being paid to you. I am sorry. This is not the reflection of how a government takes care of its people. This is the exact opposite of how a government takes care of its people. No,
your analysis.
I don't understand how is the government taking care of its people by removing their safety net. We don't have a welfare system like the Western countries do. It's not as if they are unemployed today, tomorrow, and they will be taken care of.
Allow me to complete. Everywhere.
Yes, Mr. Islam.
There has to be a culture where the productivity should be prioritized. The employment based on the skill set available, employment based on the requirement of the factory or the company is something which needs to be addressed. You cannot just push for investment without having the law or the changes in the legislation which needs to be in place. I think these are things which is important to attract more and more capital in India so that you can give more employment to these people, because these people needs employment also. If you don't have capital, you cannot create that kind of environment where you can create this job for these people. So you also have to understand that job creation is a must. Those companies which are the global investors will not come to India unless there are certain changes which is to be made in both in terms of labor laws and the land laws. This needs to be changed, and unless this is being addressed, they have not been able to make investment here.
Okay, so the BJP's argument is all right. No. All right. So the BJP's argument here is we need to bring in investment. Let's use this pandemic as an opportunity to beat China, to take away some of that business, upscale and boost our business and manufacturing. I take that point, Mr. Zafar Islam. Please, by no means mistake this for me opposing any kind of attraction of investment. I am just saying it's not a trade-off. It's not a trade-off, Mr. Islam. One cannot be at the cost of the other.
No, 10 seconds only.
Now let me please, if you will please allow me, Mr. Zafar Islam, go across to, 10 seconds, and then I have to go to Adil. Yes.
I'm saying you also, in the same breath, I would like to convey through your channel that their interests will be completely safeguarded. It's not that we are using pandemic as an excuse to come up with this kind of changes in the law. On the contrary, and we are not sending them home because they will create a law and order, a problem for law and order, is absolutely incorrect. In fact, the demand is coming from these laborers that they want to visit their home, and something which we have been able to organize. But there are many labor, which they want to stay back, and they are working in the factory. So it's not that everyone.
They have been demanding. Okay, Mr. Islam, I need to go to our other panelists. But to say, they were demanding, so we heard them, is ridiculous, because they've been demanding it from day one. And we took 6 weeks to make this decision. Adil Boparai, even the Congress-governed states are making these changes. What's the rush? Why are we making these changes without actually taking care of the other side of the issue?
Well, Tanvi, as far as the Congress-ruled state governments are concerned, let me clarify that this is a temporary measure only up till the 30th of June. This is number one. Number two, the only measure which has been undertaken is that the working period will be increased from 8 hours to 12 hours. However, for the additional 4 hours, the workers will be paid additionally. So this is as far as the Congress-ruled state governments are concerned. But coming back to the larger issue, the suspension of labor laws by the BJP-ruled state governments will create an enabling environment for exploitation of workers. This will widen the gap between the informal sector and the formal sector. This will strip the labor of their basic human rights. Now, coming back to the labor laws, there are two landmark or significant legislations when it comes to the labor community, the migrant workers, and this covers the maximum number of workers. This is the Industrial Disputes Act and the Minimum Wages Act. These two legislations constitute the backbone of our labor laws. Now, with the suspension of these two laws, you are creating a power asymmetry between an employer and a worker. This will lead to destitution. This will lead to exploitation. And I want to put this question to Mr. Zafar Islam. What will prevent all these industrial enterprises and establishments from firing their workers and hiring new workers at lower wages? At lower wages, there's going to be no safety net. There will be no protective umbrella. There will be no regulation which will hold them back or inhibit them. Now, I was undertaking a comparative analysis with other countries in our neighborhood, and you'll be surprised. We're a $2.7 trillion economy. We aspire to be on the superpower table, Tanvi, and you'll be surprised that Vietnam, a country which is 1/10 of our size, has set out a corpus of more than $100 million for its laid-off workers. Bangladesh has set out a corpus of $90 million for its laid-off workers. Please understand, I'm underlining.
Correct.
Not for workers who are already employed, but for laid-off workers. And we can't even earmark 60,000 crore rupees, 80,000 crore rupees for 5 million workers of our country, for 500 million workers of our country. Those images of labor walking hundreds of miles, hundreds of kilometers, barefooted, without food, without water, having their children on their shoulders, hasn't that etched on our minds? Name me one country anywhere in the world which has failed its citizens in the manner and the extent which the government of India has done. They could not even arrange for their transport back to their country, back to their home. This is the plight. This is the plight of more than 60% of our population.
Yes.
This is the suit boot sarkar. And most importantly, let me negate what Mr. Zafar Islam has said. That's his primary motivating factor why he says that they've undertaken these reforms. There is no empirical evidence, Tanvi, to suggest that dilution or suspension of labor laws will lead to better productivity and efficiency. On the contrary, now with the pandemic, we are facing and we are in the midst of a decelerated economy. The demand has weakened globally. There is a liquidity crunch. So there is no basis to link that with the suspension of the labor laws, we'll have foreign investment coming into this country. But more importantly, we owe a duty to 600 million Indian citizens. For heaven's sake, this is 60% of our population.
No, and then the point being,
and the destitution. You are pushing them into indebtedness. You are pushing them into starvation. We must get our act together. And the
point being, without a safety net, you know, the world over, Adil, the working conditions that are there in some of the manufacturing facilities in Bangladesh, even in Indonesia and some of the other Southeast Asian countries are questioned. Even Bangladesh and Vietnam and Indonesia still have a fund for the welfare of these laborers. That's what they do before they go ahead and dilute the laws. Now, if we are to sit here and compare ourselves to a dictatorship country like China, which has no accountability and no transparency in how it functions, and Bangladesh, then, I mean, I don't know where we're going with this. Yes, we have to be competitive. Yes, we have to attract investment. Yes, we don't want to go back to licensed Raj. Yes, we have to enable our factories and our factory owners and industries to run a business, to not make it difficult for them with, it's 100 permissions that they have to get and licenses that they have to get. Yes, those reforms must be done, but they cannot be done at the cost of labor rights, individual rights, simply human rights.
Absolutely,
completely out of time. So I'm going to thank our panelists for joining us right now. But viewers, there is no rush. Labor reforms have been the point of conversation for years together. Even for this government, if they wanted to bring in, they could have done it at any given point in the last 6 years. They would have a proper legislation ready, which ensures that this part of the workforce gets taken care of. Why are we allowing states to rush into this? Literally fighting for some space for workforce, for industries to be set up without caring about the working conditions or what we are going to pay for laborers. And I think if this pandemic has proven anything, is how we as a country have repeatedly failed to take care of the poor. And when they are in distress, how we fail to respond to that. There is a reason why hundreds of them are still on the streets, walking on the road, going hungry, trying to get back to their homes, walking by the railway tracks. The reason is that we did not listen to them earlier. And now we are again creating a situation where their voice may go unheard. States have to be more cognizant about the rules they bring in. Labor reforms are more than welcome, but it's not a trade-off, not at the cost of individuals' basic human rights. Thank you for joining us on this conversation.